Hey, Freddy. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview. Everyone in the class, I guess this is Freddy Boulton. He works at Gradio. He works at Hugging Face. It's a major open source AI startup that's been valued at a couple $1 billion, I think, at this point. But it's quite a small team. It's French, I guess, in origin, but it's really in New York. It's an American startup, and their code is involved in pretty much every open source venture in AI that you can think of nowadays, and especially tools that you can download. And indeed, some of the code that we've been using in the course up until this point has come from Hugging Face. And another thing that comes from Hugging Face is Gradio, which is the content of this week's course. And I thought, who better to introduce Gradio than an engineer working on Gradio? And so once again, this is Freddie. Freddie, you're in Florida, eh?
Yes, thanks for having me. Great
Sure.
to talk with you about this and to meet everyone in your class.
Sure. Um, and I'm sure everybody will be very excited to see it too. I'm going to cut and splice this as we go along, but regardless, um, this week's content goes through Gradio pretty quickly. I explain what it is, I use it, I demonstrate it, but I'm not sure if students have that really gives students enough time to grasp what it is in its entirety. So if I were to ask you what Gradio is and what it is that you work on, how would you explain it?
Great, yeah. So I think Gradio, you can think of it as like pretty much like the fastest way to write a functioning website using Python. For people who aren't familiar with like the whole like tech stack of how the web works, but usually you have like the nice pretty stuff that's like HTML and CSS, and then you usually have some like the server that's like doing like kind of like more of like the heavy lifting. So that takes like right there you have two moving parts, two different skill sets. Takes a lot of work. You want to place a button on the right point on a page. You kind of have to like you kind of have to like uh figure like wrestle with CSS and HTML and like do all that stuff. And yeah, it's a lot of work. Like for doing something simple, it can take you a lot of work, especially like if you like want to do it like many times over, right? So the value add of Gradio is really kind of taking out all this like server stuff, HTML, CSS, and letting you define an entire website in Python. So Python is like a very easy, it's one of the easier languages to learn. It kind of reads like English sometimes. And it has like a low learning curve. So yeah, so Gradio can get you a website really quickly. And then what's cool about Gradio specifically for like this course is that Gradio was built with artificial intelligence in mind. So if you're learning Gradio, like a lot of the demos are tailored to like how do I get this model that's on my machine or on this API into a website that then I can share with literally anyone with an internet connection. Yeah, that's kind of like the value add is kind of like to democratize in a way. Everyone loves using that word, but to like make it really easy to build a website and also to add AI into that website. So now like all of like the cutting edge advances that you read about in the news, like Whisper for translation, GPT with language models, and like all the hot stuff that's coming out. You can create an interface for it really quickly using Gradio and really easily. And then once you do that, then pretty much the model can use it. Can anyone can use the model, right? The model is like pretty much like on the internet, and like you can kind of give that power or use that model however you want to anyone. So yeah, that's kind of the my quick summary of Gradio.
Cool. I think something that's really been consternating for journalists in particular when it comes to language models, when it comes to generative AI, is there's such a gap between the base technologies, the models that get released on a daily basis, the cool things that people come up with, and then actual functioning front ends. There's such an amazing gap. Like on the one hand, you do have major tech companies coming out with front ends like Bard, OpenAI's new GPT. I'm forgetting what they're calling it, the assistant API anyway. Um, and then also Claude is a kind of a nifty front end, but all of these front ends, they're both tied to proprietary models, and they're also kind of finicky in and of themselves. And I've had OpenAI's front end break down quite a bit. And but on the other hand, the open source community is pumping out so many cool new applications on a daily basis, but you tend to need to know Python to run them. You tend to need to know how to use the command line, and so many journalists, I think, quite simply don't have the time to pick that up. Um, and even people working with specifically journalists and language models like Simon Wilson have put together tools that are potentially helpful, but they still continue to reside in the command line. So my sense with this course was that Gradio was perfect to get people a fancy front end that they can use their model with. And um, but that's still one person doing it on their own. Are you familiar with companies using Gradio? Is this like a widely used technology? We've shown it in the
Yeah.
class with Hugging Face's spaces, but I'm wondering if it's more something that newsrooms should be thinking about deploying. Is it something that particular companies could be using for their own products? What's the deal there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't work too closely on the commercial side, so I can't really name like particular companies that do use Gradio. But we do get a lot of feature requests of people like saying like, "Hey, I'm trying to run this, and like my company is like private network, like I'm running into this issue. Can you like help us?" Right? And then we end up like troubleshooting, debugging. Then we get a lot of people asking us for just asking questions around like what are Gradio's like data retention policies, right? Because they're trying to like work it into like the security policies at their company. And by the way, Gradio doesn't collect any data that's like passing through the model of the server. So it's great for privacy focused organizations or companies. So there is a lot of interest in people wanting to use this in their company. And I think the reason is just because it's really easy to get something that's like state of the art and open source and just like whip up a front end and deploy it internally really easily, right? You don't have to rely on signing some big deal with like OpenAI or like another company. You don't have to rely on their service, right? Especially like if you have like privacy in mind, you can kind of just take one of the hottest models on the internet and kind of just wrap it into a front end. And the good thing about the front end is not just that it's like that it looks nice. Going to your comment about like it looking fancy, because even people that know how to use the command line, like you mentioned, like it's kind of annoying, right? Like it's much better if you could just like have a tab open on your browser and just like whenever you need it, it's there. And then you could also just share that URL, just
Mhm.
link it to someone else. So it is just like way more, I think, way more convenient. So yeah, it's not just like the researcher or like the scientist person that should be interested in Gradio. I think really it's anyone because anyone can use Gradio. Really, like the end result of Gradio is a website, and we've all been using websites like extensively for like at least like the last like 20 years or something. So yeah.
Cool. A question that comes up again and again with my students over the last couple of months is, do they need to hire a full-on full stack engineer to be handling everything AI related in their newsroom? Like a lot of newsrooms do not have the resources to hire on a new person. So if someone was starting from zero, or maybe they've done a little bit of Python work for data science or R before, how big is the learning curve? You say it's low, but how low is it for a normal person?
Um, you know, I frankly think it's like pretty small just because to get something that works well and that kind of does what you expect it to do, it's
Mhm.
no more than like 20 lines of code, right? So like that already kind of just like dramatically decreases the amount of stuff you need to learn, right? I think to get up and going in radio, you need to learn maybe like two classes and like a couple methods, like it's nothing, I think anyone who's like at least dabbled a little bit in programming can pick that up like really quickly. And then, once you start getting comfortable with it, like we provide you the avenue for you to like get more custom with it and like kind of go, not off the rails, but like kind of like do something a little bit more custom. But Radio has like great starting points for beginners to kind of get up and going really quickly.
Cool. So, and if you're really stuck, maybe you can ask Llama or Mistral a few questions on the API as well.
Yeah, yeah, or the Hugging Face Discord, right? Like we have like a really big community of people that are willing to, like people ask questions about Gradio or like any other Hugging Face product or like even just like general like concept questions and like people from all over the world usually answer. So or they answer pretty quickly. So
Cool. I'll make sure to get the link out to that then. My last question is, for journalists in particular, have you seen prototypes, demonstrations, or something that you think journalists might find especially interesting when it comes to both Gradio and using language models? Um, because I think in the course we've been doing a demonstration of retrieval augmented generation, but that's not the only thing you can use language models
right.
for, of course. So if you have any other examples in mind, I think the students would appreciate that quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a lot of like really cool like transcription demos actually built with Gradio. So it's like they'll like auto transcribe like a podcast with you with like the automated like speaker notes.
Hmm.
And I've seen that for like YouTube videos as well. And I think like when I saw that, I think it's like, oh, like that's like I think that would be useful for a journalist,
That'd
right?
be
Because it's
very
like
useful.
you could just like,
Yeah.
like do an interview and then just like automatically transcribe it. And then, you could like email it to someone or whatever. You just control F, right? Something like that. So, and like all that stuff runs locally too. So it's like if you have like, privileged interview, you don't have to like upload it, send it to like OpenAI or something. So I think that's like really cool. And then I think also just some of the models that I think are like really cool and like I think not a lot of people are talking about them are like all like the document question answering models
Hmm.
like on there's a lot of like transformers models that you could just like upload a PDF or like upload a photo of a document and just like ask it like natural language questions, which I think is like really really neat for like automating maybe some like financial audit or something that like a journalist might want to do and invest or like like yeah like use AI in an investigation like analyzing some documents like asking like like how much money was spent in this month or something. And like the from what I've seen, like the results are like really good. So I'd be like really curious to see someone like take that up and like build something like really useful in the newsroom. I think it could be really, really exciting.
Cool. Well, that's a lot to chew on. Thank you very much. I'm sure
Yeah.
the students will appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate it. So cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.